Wysteria, energy, twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and the world of fairies. So, we're still on the D's. We're now on the Domovik. In Russian folklore, especially in Bulgarian, Croatian, Czech, Polish, Serbian, Slovene, and Ukrainian lore, the Domovik is a male household spirit similar to the brownie. It appears as an old, grey-haired man. Loving fire, it lives behind the stove. Sometimes the Domovik will assist the family by feeding the livestock if the chore is otherwise forgotten to be completed, or by lending a hand with field work. It would also punish the women of the house who broke social taboos, such as spinning on a Friday or leaving the house without their head covered properly. At night, food is left out for him so it will bring luck and prosperity to the household. It preferred bread, incense, juniper porridge, salt and tobacco. If the Domovik is abused or neglected, he will burn down your house. The Domovik was also consulted as an oracle. If a question was asked of it, and his invisible touch was soft and gentle, then it was a sign of coming happiness. Cold or prickly touch foretold a death or misfortune. When this fairy took a liking to a particular horse or cow, it was said never to fall ill. But if it did, then apparently it would scatter its food, tie its hair in knots, and keep the animal constantly bothered so it would never rest. The Domovika. The Domovika is a female brownie. It's the equivalent of the Domovik, but basically this appears as a woman, but it has a beak and the legs of a chicken. It's living in either house or hen house or basement of a family home. This little fairy will help a good-natured wife with the household chores, but if the woman of the home is ill-natured, the Domovika will kick her children awake and cause them to cry all night long. Donna. In Western Ireland, the Donna was a fairy queen. She ruled over the Daon Sihi, a fairy hill. Knockshinguna, Hill of the Fairy Calf, was located in Tipperary County. Described as being more compellingly beautiful than any living mortal woman, Donna had long blonde hair and dressed in robes made of silver gossamer glittering with drops of dew shining like diamonds. As often was the case, her husband, Finvara, a fairy king, was a cad who incessantly pursued and took human women. Don Ferini, Don Ferin Brown Truth, a fairy king in Irish fairy lore. He ruled from his seat of power on Knockfia the Mountain in Limerick County, well known to kidnap mortal women from the back of his magical white horse and force them to join him at dances. Don Ferin was associated with the underworld, and his victims were never seen again. It was also associated with storms and weather in general. The Duinioi, the night man. This is a nature spirit, a fairy taking a misty humanoid shape and giving warning of incoming storms by sounding off with a great lamenting howl. When this banshee-like cried, it sounded like howla or hawa. When it's heard in the winter, it's warning of a great and violent storm approaching. Dooney. The Scottish law. Dooney appears as either as an old man, old woman, or as a pony. Unlike the Dunny and other fae that assume these guises, the Dooney will guide lost travellers and help them in need. Dory, also known as the Bora. Spearman. It was one of the many dwarfs named in the Voluspa. Dorion. In Greek mythology, Dorion was a water nymph, one of the Danads. Doris, born one of the 3,000 daughters of the Titans Oceanus and Tethys. La Domete. Similar to the Sandman of British lore, the La Domete, or the La Dome, ensures pleasant dreams and sleep for infants in the neighbourhood of Poitou, located in western France. She is described as a kindly woman who sprinkles sand and sleep in children's eyes. This is to help them have sweet dreams, of course. Dotto, a sea nymph, the milk white. She was a nereid of the safe voyage, or safe fishing expedition in classical Greek mythology, and she was born the daughter of Nereus and Doris. Drac. Very similar to the Dracae of Scotland, the Dracs of southern France shape change in gold cups or rings and float down streams where they will be seen by lactating women or boys who are bathing. When the person touches the item, the Drac then drags their victim down to their underwater abode. Women are forced to spend up to 7 years breastfeeding the Drac's children. These fairies are also said to be able to assume human form and go shopping in the market. Their true form is said to be large purple blobs floating along the surface of the water. The Dracs were most populous in the English Channel, but their previous home and sacred kingdom was Seine River. These are now the Dracae, and they are like the Dracs. They're water fairies, and they live in lochs of rivers, and they leave gold cups floating on the surface, or bits of jewellery just below it. And these fair lure women and children to the water's edge, and they snatch them up and drag them into their watery domain, use their victims as slaves. After the introduction of Christianity, it was said a quick blessing or saying over the items meant they were safe to take and you wouldn't be dragged to your death. So now, dragons. If you don't know much about dragons, I do have a whole playlist. I'll try and link it below where I did the wise ones. That's because dragons do not like to be called dragons as such, but to give them respect, we call them the wise ones. And I did a whole playlist about all the different dragons through history and such and whatnot, so I'll link that below if you're interested in dragons, of course. Existed in some form in virtually every culture, the dragon, basically resembling a huge serpent, is also tied to fairy lore. Powerful beings like the fae, dragons abduct beautiful women, can be male or female, represent good or evil, are aquatic, terrestrial, and are associated with the elements air, earth, fire, and water. In most British tales and in Scandinavian lore, dragons are described as wingless creatures, having long, scaly bodies, living in pools or wells, and having poisonous breath. These dragons hoard treasure, have a preference for eating young maidens, and are notoriously difficult and dangerous to kill. To slay a dragon is almost a guarantee to win the hand of a local princess and become the new king. Fairies with densely hairy bodies will commonly have a dragon as a pet in Germanic folklore. Dragotina and Felina are fates. They're neutrally aligned. They are the owners and caretakers of a beautiful garden. Dragotina is an erotic enchantress and seductress. She stands near the river, the stream of love, and offers to unsuspecting knights a cup filled with the elixir of blissful oblivion. By drinking it, the victim forgets who they were, obliterating their identity, completely destroying the person they were. At her father's request, she created a garden, a pleasure palace, and temple to enchant a young prince, Orlando, and keep him there. He travels in a flying wagon. Drake, meaning dragon. British folklore, Drake is benevolent. He's invisible also and is a house spirit. He comes from fire and basically is like a small dragon. It keeps the firewood dry on the hearth burning in exchange for being able to live in the family home. As kind as these fairies are, and they are kind, they do smell a little bit like rotten eggs apparently. It is true, but I think you get used to it over time, you know. If a drake discovers it is not welcome, it will leave the house without holding a grudge. There's never been a story told of a drake acting out or reacting negatively to an insult, slight, or ill treatment that they may have received. They just leave. Drobnir. Drobnir is one of the many dwarfs named in the Voluspa. Drosera. Drosera was a nymph of mythology from ancient Greece and Rome. She was one of the naiads, and she was known as the Dewy. Dragon Hill Boggle. In Cumberland, England, the singular entity known as the Dragon Hill Boggle was first sighted in the 19th century. Its appearance coincided with the disappearance of a local peddler and the appearance of a black dog that began to terrorise the area. When the community made the connection, they went and searched the area eventually finding the body of the peddler. As soon as the recovered body was interred in the churchyard, the drug and hell boggle disappeared forever. The wounds it had inflicted on its victims also began to heal. Dryad, also known as the Hamadryad. Although originating in the lore of ancient Greece, the Dryads are well known all throughout the Celtic countries. The Dryads are one of the 12 species of nymphs. They are the nymphs of the forests and trees, particularly oak trees. They have power to both punish those who abridge the life of the trees under their protection, or reward those who actively extend and protect their trees. The life of a Dryad is tied to its tree. It is only as long-lived as its tree. Ash, oak and thorn trees are especially important in the Celtic traditions. When these 3 species of trees are found together, they form what is called a fairy triad. The trees in these groves are considered sacred to fairies, more so to the Dryads, describing as looking like the perfection of female beauty and youth. A Dryad woman will take a human male as a lover. When it does, it's not uncommon for the Dryad to solicit a vow from the man, asking him to avoid sexual intercourse with all other women. If the lover breaks the vow, he will be struck blind. Draimo, a sea nymph, she was one of the Nereid. She was born on Nereus and Doris. Dryope, one of the Oreads. Dryope was a nymph from classical Greek mythology. There's many of them as well, like I say. Duelin. In Scandinavian lore, Duelin was one of the 2 most ingenious and expert dwarf smiths. Durin was the other. He forged the magical sword trifling for the godling hero Suofoleme, the second in descent from the god Odin and king over godlike Russia. Duelin warned the magical sword shall be the bane of man every time it is drawn. Done 3 of the greatest atrocities, it shall also be thy bane. Not long after, Duelin was slain by the actual weapon. Duelach, a fairy piper from Irish folklore. He was a piper who played fairy music for the fae to dance. Dukba. So this is in Annamie's Beliefs of Vietnam. 3 nature spirits, and Dukba is one of them. The spirit of the forest, created by Jade Emperor. And there is 3 of them, like I say. Duende, duende casa trasgo. Duende, duende. In the fairy lore of Latin America, Philippines, Portugal and Spain, the duende is a solitary fairy. More often heard than seen, it whistles while walking through the woods. It is a house spirit, but unlike the helpful brownie, the duende hates humans and shows its dislike by throwing bits of clay and stones at people. Fortunately, there are very few left in the world. Most often, this diminutive fairy is described as looking like either a small middle-aged or elderly woman, having long fingers like icicles, wearing a green robe and a large hat. In Hispanic folklore from the American Southwest, the duendes are considered to be malicious and described as having green skin and red eyes. They live inside the walls of children's rooms and tempt them into misbehaving, attempting to steal their soul. In Central American folklore, particularly Belize, the duendes are considered to be more of a nature spirit and has no thumbs. They call it Tata Duende. The Duergar, dwarf. Scandinavian lore, the Duergar were the maggots who consumed the flesh of the dead giant Mir. As they ate, they were gifted with human knowledge, took the general appearance of mankind, but were short, having stubby legs but long arms that almost touched the ground. It's interesting. The Duergars, and this is French or Northern England. The Duergar is a malicious species of dwarf. It gains no greater pleasure than in tricking people into dying, usually by pretending to be a flickering of light, leading them through the dark off the edge of a cliff. It will also turn around the signs and signposts, causing them, any traveller at least, to become lost. A solitary fairy and skilled metallurgist. It can be either male or female, but they're described as standing about 2 foot tall, wearing green hats, lambskin coats and moleskin shoes. It's often that the male leads the travellers to their death, as they believe the hills and the rocks they live in are theirs alone. They do not tolerate the presence of others. That's definitely crazy, right? Dufia Snoozy, one of the many dwarfs named in the Voluspa. Yeah, Snoozy. That's what it means. Where did they put that, though? They put that in Snow White later, right? Nah, it was a dwarf from the Voluspa. Wasn't meant for Snow White, but they did it anyway. Dugani. In Slavic lore, Dugani was a singular entity, a household fairy spirit that looked after bread dough and prevented it from turning sour. Dullahan. Before the Irish potato famine began in 1845, no such fairy being as a Dullahan existed. But once the famine had begun, people started to claim a banshee was being accompanied by a headless man riding upon a horse at midnight. Sightings were most numerous on feast days. The being travelling with the banshee was described as carrying his head, a smile on its face from ear to ear. The head was said to be the colour and texture of mouldy cheese. Sometimes the horse was headless as well. Other times the Dullahan was described more like a death coach, made of human thigh bones, and was pulled by 6 black horses with skull heads, their eyes lit by candles in their sockets. No matter its appearance, the Dullahan races down roads, spreading disease and causing households to fall ill. The fairy being uses a bullwhip to lash out the eyes of anyone on the roadside who sees him. He is cursed with poor eyesight himself, so feels others should be too if they see him. Lucky victims only get covered with a bucket of blood he throws at them as he charges by. The Dullahan is a member of the Unseelie court. It is exceedingly greedy, and momentarily offering anything to it will be accepted. Dun Glisht, wise woman, a woman with a great deal of knowledge about fairies, herbs, and sometimes magical abilities. She was born with the gift, or given the gift by the Fae. They can see the fairies out of their eye. Sometimes this ability was given to them as payment for acting as a midwife to a fairy, or because they were part of the Fae in another life, or because they were born into a family known by the Fae. Other times it actually was an accident and they had some fairy oil rubbed in their eye which allowed them to see. Dund. In the folklore from India, the Dunda was a terrifying family spirit described as looking like a rider with no hands or head, or feet, riding on a horse. It was similar to the Dullahan of Celtic lore. The limbs are sometimes said to be tied to the saddle. As it travels, the Dunda calls out the names of the occupants of the nearby houses. The people must not answer his call, or they will go insane and die. Dunye, one of the dwarfs in Nordic mythology. Dunny. The variation of that is Dooney, which we've done. The fairy lore of Northumbria, England. A Dunny is a shape-shifting practical joker. Its favourite trick is to look like a midwife's horse, and as soon as it needs, disappears, leaving her stranded. It would also play a similar prank on ploughmen. Some sources say the Dunny is an individual entity rather than a species of fairy. In Scotland, the Dunny is known as a Dooney, which we have done, but has a much kinder disposition. Dunter, also known as Faries redcap. Dunters are a type of fairy spirit living in old peel towers and keeps along the borderlands between England and Scotland. These spirits make a constant noise like the grinding of flaxseed against stone. It is believed if the sound increases in volume, it's an omen of impending death. It has been speculated the foundations of the old keeps were made from ancient Picts who, according to their tradition, made a blood sacrifice over the stones, making the Dunters the spirits of those sacrifices, be they animal or human. Durin, also known as the Dripadirin. In old German law, Durin, slumberer, was the name of the dwarf who resided within a stone. That's nice. Dush. In the mythology from ancient Gauls of France, the Dush were a hairy species of fairy similar to the hobgoblin of Celtic lore. The Dush are essentially a third version of the brownie, but a very furry version, obviously. We're not going to do dwarf because dwarfs have a long, long history, as you know. There's also the duende, which is different from the other one. A Filipino fairy lore says the duende are a type of nature spirit living in caves or trees, rocks, in unused dark areas of the home. They are partial to the acacia, balete, camito, and mango trees. They live in hills. The white duende are considered to be beneficent, while the black duende are malicious. They enjoy playing with children. Descriptions vary. They're said to be between 2 and 3 feet tall, have red skin, hairy bodies, long beards, pointed ears, smell of either damp earth or dried feces, and wear pointed hats and shoes. They're able to shapeshift into the form of a human man. These fairies will sometimes fall in love with a married woman and try to take her as its owner. The only way the woman can rid herself of this fairy is to be sure she is always in the company of 2 men. Now that's interesting indeed. And that is the next part of our wonderful... Sorry, that's my Alexa doing something in the background and I didn't turn her down. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the magical world of fairies. I really appreciate it. Please hit that like, share if you can, and also consider subscribing. Many blessings. Wysteria, energy, twister.